to be talking. I'm very happy to be talking to you. And I want, first of all, to think about some responses to the conference theme, which is TESOL in the 21st Century, Recent Trends, Research and Practices. When I saw the title, I'm thinking, well, TESOL we talk about TESOL as one thing, but basically everywhere there have to be different practices. There have to be different approaches to TESOL. I think we can't talk about TESOL as one thing. We need to localize. We need to think about what would be TESOL for Nepal, for example. The 21st century, as we know, we can't really predict what's going to happen in the 21st century. We know that just from the pandemic. We couldn't predict that. There have been other things in your experience in Nepal which you haven't been able to predict. For example, the very big earthquake that you experienced. It's very difficult to predict what TESOL will be like all through the 21st century. So I'm being a little bit, I'm interrogating or questioning the title of the conference a little bit. As you heard, I'm very interested in the history of English language teaching in different contexts. And as a historian, I have to say that it is too soon to say what are trends, because really we need a bird's eye perspective to look at trends. We need to look at trends over a period of time. I could say, well, this is fashionable now, that is fashionable now, but really trends, we need to have a bird's eye view, and we can only see what the trends are from a historical distance. Maybe 50 years from now, we will be able to know. Of course, we know that there's been big change going on, partly due to the pandemic. But change is different from trends. Trend is over a period of time. Research is part of the practice, part of the title. And I was very sorry I couldn't hear Tasnima's talk just now, but I think she was also thinking about, well, when we say research for what? For what purpose? And for whose benefit? And by whom? Who is going to do the research? These are just some questions to raise. And practices, whose practices? I'm going to focus on your practices in Nepal, assuming most of you are from Nepal. So I'm just questioning a little bit the title, reflecting on the title of the conference, as I think it's important for main speakers to do that. And I think there is a kind of assumption in the title, and perhaps in many titles of conferences, and a lot of our professional discourse in TESOL, there is a kind of assumption that change is coming from outside, and that we need to know what are the general trends, what is the universal nature of TESOL, which I'm questioning. So I'm questioning this idea that change comes from the outside. I think inside the title is a little bit of a sense that we are powerless to resist trends, or that we have to follow trends. We have to follow the research that is coming from British or American universities or Australian universities. And I'm questioning this assumption, basically, in this talk. But that's not saying anything new. We have a lot of critique, and I'm sure Alistair Pennycook, well, I'm very sorry I couldn't hear his talk. I'm sure it was very, very interesting. I'm sure he would have been questioning the same thing. My title is going to be Perspectives on Change from Outside and Perspectives on Change from Within and Between. What do I mean by that? I'm going to argue that effective change comes from within, from our experience, from our reflections as teachers. I count myself as a teacher. Effective change comes from our own research as teachers. I'll be talking about teacher research, teachers doing research. Versus the idea that change should come from the outside or from the top down. I'm advocating the idea that good change, effective change, comes from inside ourselves, inside our own experience, and from our research, and from these things, from our experience, our reflections, our research, shared among teachers, between teachers. So I'm taking a bottom-up approach. So first of all, a little bit more about perspective, about change, the idea of change from outside. In our field of TESOL, profession of TESOL, innovation is a kind of buzzword, a very common word in our discourse. We always think we need to be innovating, doing things new. We're always told as teachers, you've got to change, you've got to do things new, you've got to follow the fashion. But history actually shows that despite all of this talk about innovation in our field, change doesn't result very often. Change actually is very slow, usually. That's not true during the pandemic. I think the change was very, very fast for many teachers. But in general, all of these latest methods, like communicative language teaching, task-based language teaching, project-based learning, governments, ministries, and publishers and academics may say, this is the latest fashion, this is what you need to change. But teachers don't tend to change very quickly. And when teachers change, they are usually changing because they've found from somebody else that something is a good idea. Some other teacher has proposed an idea that they've tried out, that is tested. It's not new. It's something that other teachers have found useful. Actually, that happened a lot, I think, in the pandemic as well. That actually we were learning a lot from other teachers about how to cope with teaching in the pandemic. Well, even though people like Adrian Holiday have shown for many years, 30 years at least, that innovations from outside don't really work very well. Innovations are imposed or imported, they carry on, they continue. We still have this situation of impositions from the top down and imports of ideas from elsewhere. So there have been critiques of this situation for many years, but critiques on their own don't improve the situation. I'm going to be, I think we need to undermine a mindset. There's a mindset which continues, which some people could say is a kind of colonized mindset, colonized by applied linguistics even, that teachers feel they need to do what applied linguists say by academic thinking. I know that Prem Payak is going to talk later about decolonizing ELT. Well, Frantz Fanon has talked about colonization of the mind. And maybe there's a need for, within teacher education, within TESOL, for us to decolonize our minds, to get away from the idea that the center knows best, or that new is better. We can provincialize. Something I've been involved with is, I'm from England, from Britain. And of course, Britain has been, through the British Council, the British government has been guilty of spreading ideas about TESOL, about communicative language teaching, etc. So my own approach has been to look historically at things like IATEFL, the ELT journal, to show how they reflect a certain kind of centered thinking, which is not necessarily appropriate for the rest of the world. So I've been a little bit critical through its history about showing really that TESOL is not necessarily universally relevant, but it comes from a particular context, which is the UK or the USA, and showing in that way that kind of deconstructing the power, if you like, of TESOL. But today I want to focus on kind of constructive approaches, because there's been a lot of over 30 years, really. Think about that, the fact that Robert Phillipson, for example, wrote his book, Linguistic Imperialism, which was a critique of the imperialism of spreading methods from the UK in particular outwards. That was 30 years ago already. So there have been plenty of critiques, but the situation continues, I think, of teachers feeling they need to follow ideas coming from the outside, or fashions coming from the top down, from academics, etc. So I want to emphasize what can we do then as teachers? What can we do as teacher educators to counter this mindset? One thing we can do is to celebrate local achievements. This is again something I've been involved with. Just like we can talk about the history of UK ELT or UK American TESOL, we can look at local histories. And I think that's something that's really valuable. That, for example, Nelta, I helped a little bit with Nelta. Bim Gautam's writing the history of Nelta, Nepal Association for English Language Teachers. That's a really good thing to do, to celebrate local initiatives, local histories, but also to identify local expertise. This is very important. And the Hornby Trust, which I'm also involved with, has had a decentering ELT initiative going for 3 or 4 years. Not to tell the rest of the world, again, that you must decenter, because that would be arrogant and that would be kind of imperialistic, but to identify cases. At the moment, we are focusing on teacher associations. What are teacher associations around the world doing, in fact, to value local expertise? And you might be interested in an article we wrote recently in the ELT Journal about decentering ELT in January. Today, I'm going to, though, focus on 2 approaches which I've been involved with, which fits the idea of change from the inside, or change from the bottom up. And one of them is called the enhancement approach, and the other, it involves identifying, building on, and sharing success among teachers. And the other is developing teacher research, especially the idea of exploratory action research. So these are the 2 constructive initiatives that I think might help. But just to remind you, decentering ELT, this is from that ELT Journal article. And this is the starting point. Just read that for yourself if you like. So work needs to be put into empowering teachers to develop contextually appropriate thinking and action. And this is what I want to talk about. And this is what a lot of my work has been involved with over the last 10 years. So moving to perspectives on change from within and between teachers. From within, I mean from within the experience of teachers. And between, I mean sharing that experience among teachers. These 2, I'm going to look at these 2 aspects, these 2 approaches. These are not new methods. These are not new teaching methods. These are ways to achieve this goal of building from the bottom up. And the context for, first of all, an enhancement approach, identifying, building on, and sharing success as defined by teachers themselves. Context would be 2 contexts. One is the group, the TELCnet group network, which I founded with Fawzia Shamim in Pakistan in 2008. And we call it's the Teaching English in Large Classes Network. And the second context I want to talk about was a workshop I gave with Amal Padwat from India in 2013 in Kathmandu with teachers from South Asia. So first of all, as a context, and you may be interested to access the website, for example, of TELCnet. We are a research and development network looking at issues faced by teachers in large classes around the world, which is a context that has been neglected in research. Most teachers around the world teach in large classes, in primary schools or secondary schools, sometimes quite cramped conditions, sometimes very little technology. But most research and most discourse in TESOL or ELT assumes something quite different. It assumes relatively small classes of mixed nationality in language schools or universities where students share, they don't share L1, for example. And so that's one reason why many of the methods that have been exported have been failing, really. So we want to go from bottom up, and in this research network, we don't see small class teaching as the norm. Instead, we don't see teaching in large classes as a problem. Instead, we start with descriptions of practice, in particular good practice, as perceived by teachers and students themselves. So that is the foundation of an enhancement approach. In the network, by the way, your colleague Prem Payak, he's a member of this network and has been a leading member, together with people like Harry Kuchar in Cameroon, Rama Matthew, who I think is at this conference in India, some leading teacher educators. We want to focus on practical issues and help teachers develop appropriate methodology from the bottom up, for example, through practitioner research. So you can see here the basis for what I'll talk about later, which is exploratory action research. And we favor a qualitative exploratory case study or story-based approach to our research. So let me begin with a story from a teacher in a rural Nepalese secondary school. Prem Payak was one of those who engaged in this research, number 3, of gathering stories of practice of teachers as a basis for possibly developing appropriate methodologies. And from his story, he talks about nearly 4 different ethnic communities in his school area. Newari, Baharis, Tamangs, and Margas. They all have their own languages and cultures. And he has a very positive approach. I mean, we could think of large classes as a problem, but he thinks of it as an opportunity. He uses aspects of their language and talks about their feasts and festivals in the class. And he so addresses their linguistic as well as cultural identity. Of course, these days we have become more familiar with this kind of approach, building our teaching on the languages and cultures of our students. But at that time, 2011, it was not so much talked about. But in the practice of a teacher, Matav Timlasina, it was there. So we don't have to wait for academics to catch up. In this sense, we can find many successful practices of teachers and make case studies and stories and share these with other teachers. Anyway, they all feel welcome. Even if it is crowded, they never feel that teacher doesn't care about them. It helps me make my students feel supported. The different issue for him was that a few students generally dominate in large classes. But he has a very positive approach and uses them to help him by assigning them responsibilities to help weak students. And in our research, we found this was a very common response to large classes, was to ask other students to help as monitors. And he does that, he uses that. So, of course, we mustn't romanticize large classes, but we have this big problem that we can't give individual care in a large class. But he goes through the answers of one student for each bench, and then he asks the student to help his friends or her friends. Also peer correction and self-correction. So I like the last sentence. Large class size is not only a problem or burden of teachers, but also an opportunity to explore new techniques and tools. So I use that as an example of a sense of a teacher having some agency. And I know that Andy Gow will talk to you, or has talked to you about agency. So an agency, a teacher feeling agentive. Of course, teachers may feel very weighed down by their problems, but we're trying to show that some teachers can have success and can have a sense of agency. So another context I wanted to share with you was in 2013. I'm using this as an opportunity partly just to reminisce, be nostalgic about some of my visits to Nepal. And the first visit was in 2013, I think. And my second visit was to give this workshop on teaching in low-resource classrooms. Because of my work with Telcnet, I was invited by the British Council to give this workshop, together with Amal Padwat. And it brought together teachers from Bangladesh, from Nepal, from Pakistan and India. And there's about 30, 40 teachers. And Amal and I discussed this. We had about 4 days, I think, or 5 days with these teachers. So we could share ideas like these, which you can go to the website as well and find more ideas that we have gathered from teachers around the world who teach in large classes. So we could share those ideas, but we decided we would take a different approach. We decided we would ask the teachers themselves. We'd start by asking the teachers themselves to share their experiences and to share their successes. So our first activity was starting with success. Think of and share a successful teaching or learning experience in your recent experience. What made it successful? So we invited reflection on that experience of success. And I've always found that starting a workshop with something positive like this is a very good way to begin a workshop. But for the first time, we were using it as an important part of the whole workshop, because it went on. It went on for 2 days. I'll show you how. First of all, there's Amal sitting at the front. First of all, in a small group, we asked them to remember for themselves a recent experience and then just to have a chat about recent experiences. But we then took it one stage further, and with 2 new people, we asked them to stand up and tell the story to 2 more people. And took it one more stage further and find a new person, a new partner, and retell the story. And they didn't find it boring to do this over and over again. Every time they were gaining in confidence about their success, about their ability to share their success. And the last stage was to have them standing in front of the whole group, sharing their success. And in fact, this was video recorded. And we gained feedback that this was a very empowering experience for the teachers. They realized just from doing this that they felt more agentive. They felt they had more agency. We worked, after the workshop, we continued to work with them at a distance to ask them to write their stories. And eventually we came up with this book. And this was the stories of those teachers in low resource classrooms. And there are some associated video you can watch as well. You can find this resource on the Telcnet website. So that was this workshop, and so that was the beginning of really me realizing that inviting teachers to share successes could be not only a warm-up, but could constitute a major teacher development activity. And this is when, I think writing this book is when I began to use the term enhancement approach for this building, identifying success, building on success, sharing success. Now, one of the participants who you may know, Sagun Shrestha, he was one of the members of the workshop. He was doing teacher training work, and he decided he would take it further himself after the workshop. He voluntarily decided this. We didn't ask him to do this. So in Nepal, he adopted the same approach, inviting teachers, and he found it was an effective model. It went even further. At the NELTA conference in 2015, he had a workshop where he did the same thing. He called it an ELT clinic, but it was basically inviting teachers to share recent success. And it went even further. Some of you may have participated in a conference that he organized with his colleagues in 2018 and 2019, success story conferences. So instead of inviting academics from the outside, it was teachers standing up and sharing recent successes in their experience. Again, this got a lot of good feedback from participants. And it went even further, more recently, in a joint initiative by NELTA and BELTA, Bangladesh, for an online success story forum. And many of the achievements were coming out of pandemic teaching. And recently there's been a book published of stories edited from this initiative. So I'm delighted to see that this success story or enhancement approach has proved to be useful, specifically in Nepal, but I think elsewhere as well, as an alternative perhaps to waiting for change to come from the outside, recognizing and building on achievements which have been won in difficult circumstances, in sharing that with teachers who are in similar circumstances locally. And I hope you see how this fits what I was saying at the beginning about this not being change from the outside, but change from within, change from locally and sharing locally. I think I have time to say that the enhancement approach, I think, has also shown its value during the pandemic. Apart from this success story forum, where teachers were sharing experiences of success during the pandemic, we began back in 2 years ago, back in March or May, actually, 2020. Of course, if you remember, we were all very confused about what to do during the pandemic. And in Telknet, with Prem Payak and with Hari Kuchar, we decided to hold some discussions online where we were simply sharing our difficulties, but also sharing successes. And that was very useful. And I think that kind of sharing became more common, much more common in the pandemic, with teachers sharing locally with one another about their problems, their issues, and also sharing different solutions they had found. So I think actually the pandemic has shown that an enhancement approach is valuable everywhere. But I'd just like to take you back to 2015, of course, the big earthquake in Nepal. And so this had major consequences for you, and so you had already experienced what Prem Payak has called super difficult circumstances. So if you had already been teaching in difficult circumstances, your circumstances became super difficult. And this is, I guess, is what happened for you in Nepal. You're already quite difficult circumstances, with the pandemic becoming what we might call super difficult.
Sir, मैले त्यो मेसेन्जरमा त्यो लिंक पठाएँ सर.
Janak, so I found that this a notion of super difficult circumstances was useful in the context of the pandemic as well. Anyway, I just wanted to say that we tried to. This is from Prem's article at the time of the pandemic, at the time of the earthquake. But as he found then, the terrible situation was terrible, but it also revealed a transformative agency of EFL teachers who were creating their own pedagogy to help their students recover from the traumatic experience of the earthquake. And I believe that's what we all did in the pandemic as well. We found solutions, we found ways to teach from our own resources and from sharing with other teachers. We tried in the past to make materials which would prepare teachers for emergency, which would prepare teachers for crisis. I wish that we had done more, actually. But for example, one of the earthquake cases, Chetan Kumar Timlasena, we used his story that he wrote in the ELT Chaudhary magazine, and we made it into a kind of worksheet for teacher preparation, teacher education. And I think we could have done, I wish we had done more of this at that time. But this was Telknet trying to address not just difficult, but super difficult circumstances. I think that we could do more in teacher education to prepare teachers for the crises, the emergencies. And this is just showing that you can turn a story like this into materials for teacher education. And then, okay. The second thing though, the second approach really that I want to focus on is exploratory action research. And going back to the workshop in Kathmandu in 2013, another thing that we did with the teachers there, this is Miriam from Pakistan, we invited the teachers to share their problems, share their difficulties, but from that to turn problems into how can I questions. And I think that showing teachers how you can work with the problems, the difficulties they face, because we do face many, or you face many difficulties in your teaching. But if we can turn a problem into a question, that can be positive. That can take us forward into finding solutions for ourselves. And remember, my main theme is that change comes from within, or change comes through teachers having agency, if possible. So in the workshop, we, for example, Miriam, one problem was it's difficult to get students' attention to stop them working on a pair or group task. That's what she shared, and we invited her to change it into how can I question. So how can I attract students' attention during activities? And then that meant she could try to find answers. I'll show you in a minute how she tried to do that. Or not all students participate due to being in a large class. So we can change it into a question. How can I design activities or group work so all students participate? And other questions. We then, in that workshop, we helped them to narrow down to one main topic, because there may be many problems. There are many problems we face. But to try to address issues, it may be valuable to start with one and work with one. So Miriam worked with Mandeep from India, and they decided their main questions were, how can we make students interested in group work when they show no interest? So it's a very, very common issue of teachers all around the world face of lack of participation. And also, how can we ensure that everyone in the group participates? And in the workshop, what we asked them to do was to put their questions there on the poster, and to invite other teachers in the room to put their name on a post-it note if they felt they could provide some help. So again, it's a kind of enhancement approach, because we were asking teachers to find other teachers' successes. And ultimately, the teachers went and interviewed those teachers who could give them some help and gave a presentation. This took up a lot of the rest of the time in the workshop. So in fact, in 4 or 5 days, we mainly worked with teachers' own experiences. This was the second main activity that we had. And again, teachers found this very empowering, to realize that they could find solutions, maybe not from the outside, not from Dr. Smith coming from England, but from the experience of teachers who teach in situations like theirs. And you can see in this book again that after the workshop, we asked them to go and try out ideas from the colleagues and to see what worked, to see if they worked or not. It's kind of action research. Now, I've been working with teachers in difficult circumstances in Chile, in Peru, as well as India and Nepal. And from this experience, we've developed an approach which we call exploratory action research. First, exploration before going into action. So you plan to explore a particular issue, just like Mandeep and Miriam were planning to explore this issue of participation in group work. Then that you actually explore, in their case, by getting ideas from colleagues. You analyze and reflect on all of the ideas. So here is a teacher, Babita, analyzing, reflecting on the ideas that she gained. Then action. Then you can try out a new action, maybe one of the ideas that you learned. You can act. You can get data, get information to see if it worked or not. And you reflect. So that would be action research. So on the right is action research. So on the left is exploratory research, and on the right is action research. Together we call this exploratory action research. I just want to say very briefly that we have worked on this with the Action Research Mentoring Scheme, ARMS, in India and Nepal. In those 3 years in India, we worked with 48 mentors and 235 teachers. In Nepal, 26 mentors, 180 teachers, and it's carrying on. I'm still working with teachers in Nepal now. So here are some of the teachers from Nepal, the groups who've been doing exploratory action research. Let me give you an example from Janak's book that he edited, our organizer of the conference, Janak Singh Negi, Exploring for Action, Acting for Change. You can find this and other resources on that website address. So I want to give an example of the kind of research that teachers have been doing. And this is Shova Shahi, who was mentored by Janak. Shova's issue was she has difficulties in managing a large class. It's a secondary school, teaches class 6, 7, 8, and 9 in Surkhet. So here is Shova's class. Her problem that she began with was overcrowded classroom, 89 students, very difficult to manage. Her impression was students were often making disturbance. She tried many things, but they didn't work. She tried giving authority to the class monitor, as maybe we heard earlier. She tried dividing students into different groups, but it didn't work. So Janak, together with Shova, as her mentor, encouraged her to think, well, what questions are in your mind that you can explore? How can we understand the situation better? Before we try to change the situation, let's try to understand. So Janak helped her to develop these 2 questions. What particular difficulties do I have? Her sense was general sense of difficulty. And then what causes the disturbance? In particular, what's the cause? So this exploration by getting a colleague to observe, and by observing herself, by taking notes. What did she find? She found that most students were actually paying attention, but some sitting near the windows were looking outside and talking to others about what they saw. And some other students were talking about those who were looking outside the windows. So the issue, she managed to pinpoint or identify the problem more than before. And she realized that most students were actually paying attention. So she decided that's the exploration. Now she's going into action. Give more responsibilities to students sitting by the windows and to the side talkers, and move close to the students talking unnecessarily with their friends. So that's what she did. She actually put that into practice. And to make it research, she made sure that she found out what happened. So she observed what happened. Her colleague observed again, I think, and she took notes. The situation changed drastically. Why? Because she had identified the real problem, the real issue. She'd understood, she'd explored before she tried some new action. And that's the value of exploratory action research, exploring before action. Of course, it doesn't magically solve all problems, but it helped her. And she felt more, or many teachers who do this say that they feel more empowered. They feel more able to deal with issues, more agentive, they have more agency. This is what they tell us. Also, they often say that relationships with students improved because the students felt more engaged, because they were being asked for their opinion, etc. If you want to know more about exploratory action research, as has been put into practice in Nepal with some success, also I think a project with some others, with Laxman Nalawi and Sagun Shrestha and Suman Gaud, and the book they brought out as well. But anyway, there's this handbook if you'd like to find out more about it, how to do it. There's also a handbook for mentoring teacher research coming out of experience in India and Nepal, for those who'd like to support teachers to engage in this practice. So there is that book by Janek. And just like to end by saying what I've been trying to summarize, what I've been trying to convey to you, that innovation is a buzzword, but change doesn't result always from all of the top-down and outside-in innovations. Nevertheless, inappropriate impositions and imports continue, but critiques alone, just critiquing the situation, complaining about the situation, saying that it's colonialism, that it's still continuing, which it is in many ways, just critiquing it doesn't improve the situation. So I've been trying to be involved in very practical things, changing this kind of assumption that change comes from the outside. We're powerless to resist, we have to follow, because that assumption is still very common. Instead of that, I've been arguing that effective change comes, I should say, from within, from our experience, from our reflections, from our research, and from these as shared among teachers. So that's what I mean by between, change between. And example actions that I've been sharing, that I've been involved with, have been this enhancement approach and this exploratory action research. And I kind of mentioned a little bit the events that we can organize, that the success story events, the online sharing that happened in the pandemic, online conferences where teachers are center stage, sharing their teacher research, for example. I think these are things that we can continue to offer, continue to develop within TESOL. So maybe this is a recent trend. I would like to think it's a recent trend towards valuing teachers' own experiences, teachers' own research, valuing teachers' successes, and recognizing that this is actually how we have been learning during the pandemic. We haven't really been learning so much from academic research. We've actually been learning from our own experience, from our students' feedback, from other teachers' ideas. At least that's what I hear from the teachers I've worked with. So thank you for listening. I'm sorry about the technical difficulties at the beginning. Thank you.
Okay. Right. Thank you, Professor Smith, for your sharing. Indeed, I love the way you have said, some ideas. For example, when you talked about perspectives on change from outside or from within a bit or between. So effective change comes from within, from our research or reflection in our. So this is the crux of overall sharing of today. I believe that everyone, as a researcher, as a participant here, can focus more on our research, basically action research, because as Professor Smith said, action research itself is a kind of enhancement approach. So enhance yourself with this sort of research. And so action researching and teaching, and the results of this sort of research has already been seen even in Nepal through the success story conferences that LRI has been conducting with coordination with the Sagunji for the last 4 years, and even Belta or Nelta, we've been doing it time and again. Next thing, when you talk about perspective on change from outside, actually, critics alone don't improve this situation. This is what Professor Smith said. Definitely, this is what the reason new is better. So decolonize the mindset and go ahead. Automatically, the teaching will be fruitful. This is what Professor Smith said. Finally, I would like to thank Professor Smith for his practical sharing indeed. And if you have any queries, dear friends, the floor is open to you. Over to you, friends. Any question you can put. either you can ask or you can write in chat box as well. Yes, friends.
So I see that Sonia has asked me for the distinction between action research and exploratory action research. So thank you, Sonia, for your question. I hope I showed that. I'm not sure when you asked me that question, but I was hoping to show that when action research is well known, quite well known as an approach to practitioner research. That not only for teachers but for social workers, other professional, any professional could try to improve their practice by thinking, what can I change? Reflecting, what can I change? Okay, let me try to change. Let me try to do this. Let me give you an example quickly. I see that my students are not very motivated. And this is so common in Nepal, in India, in Chile, in Peru. It's the #1 most common issue that teachers want to address. I feel my students are not participating, or I feel my students are not motivated. A teacher could think, okay, I'm going to try to motivate them by showing them YouTube videos, if you have the technology. I'm going to try showing them YouTube videos. I'm going to ask, with a questionnaire, ask for their opinions. And then I'm going to reflect. And I find that some of them like it, others would prefer something else, others. So I'm going to try to improve using YouTube videos. Okay? That could be action research in simple terms. Exploratory action research would involve not just immediately planning an action, like using YouTube videos, but exploring the issue, first of all. So they seem to be not motivated. Well, their mentor, like Janek, if Janek was the mentor, would say, well, you said they seem to be motivated. What tells you that they are not motivated? Well, some of them look out of the window or something. Okay, so which students are doing that? And often teachers are not quite sure. It's just a general feeling they're not motivated. Okay, so that could be a good exploratory question. Which students are not paying attention, or which students are paying attention? A good research question. Okay. Okay, what do students say is interesting or not interesting in the class? Now that's a brave question to ask, but it's a very, very useful question. You don't have to make a questionnaire. That's time consuming. Something we emphasize is not making it too burdensome for teachers who are already very busy, keeping things simple, keeping things down to earth. You could ask that question on the board. Just please write for 5 minutes in your own language. You don't have to write in English. Tell me what is interesting, what is most interesting for you in class, because I think it's always good to get some positive feedback, and also what is not interesting in class. Get all of their pieces of paper back, and then you analyze. You have to make a pattern. You have to see what are the patterns. It could be really interesting and useful. And many teachers say they were surprised by what they found. Many teachers would say, like Shova, oh, I was surprised that most of them said the class was interesting, but some of them said this and this and this and this. So sometimes teachers just feel that was enough to explore the situation. And also maybe, okay, which students are not paying attention? You could ask somebody to observe your class if you have a colleague, or you could maybe try hard to see that during the class yourself. You can learn about where the problem is through exploring. And then that teacher, the example, she found that it wasn't that the students wanted to listen to more video or wanted to watch more video. They said in their comments, we want to have more participation, we want to speak more in class. Okay, so she explored and she found that students want to speak more in class. In that case, YouTube videos wouldn't be helping that particular problem. You have to uncover your assumption. You have to understand the problem through exploration before you do the action research. So that teacher, in fact, increased the number of speaking activities. and that was more appropriate to the problem. So that's why we advocate exploratory research before you go into the action research, and together that makes exploratory action research. But some teachers just they stop with exploratory research because it's so interesting and useful. Anyway, you should ask Janak and others who have experienced it, because they can tell you from the Nepali perspective.
Exactly. Sir, actually, you have been frequently, you have been advocating regarding large class teaching in large class or low resource classroom. And can you please share a little bit of experience of what teachers said while teaching in large or low resource classroom? What are their success stories and some hurdles they share?
Oh, sure. I'm just going to answer the question, to remind myself partly. If I share something with you, I think it might. Yes, I found this now. I think this might answer the question better than just telling you now, because I think we have time. We have limited time. So in the chat, I'm going to share a particular link. And this is a link to part of the website, the Telknet website, which I think could be particularly useful for teachers. And you can see there that we did some research trying to identify what were some major problems that teachers were facing in large classes, and then we just gave one possible answer for each one. In fact, that's just one part of the research we did. But you can see there that the amount of homework is very, very burdensome. Not all students participating. So there were answers like using monitors, using leaders in groups to help with the feedback. I won't go back over that because it wasn't really my topic today. But I think that you can find a lot of resources for you on the website. I'm just going to share one more link for that.
Thank you, Professor. Friends, any question to Professor Smith, please feel free to ask, or we will wrap up the session.
There is one question, I think, in chat box.
Yes.
Damar Singh has asked one question. What are the ways of decolonizing mindset? The center knows best. New is better. He has asked this question there.
Thank you. Well, in a way, I think, yeah, thank you. I think all of my presentation was trying to answer that question. I mean, in a way, the if you're a teacher trainer, engaging teachers in sharing their achievements can be empowering, and as I said, and can make them realize that their colleagues and their own experience can show the way forward. Okay, the solutions don't have to be coming from the outside. We're talking about empowerment, aren't we? We're talking about developing a sense of agency. It's a very strange situation where I am from a colonial power par excellence, previously British Empire, and I'm telling you how to decolonize the mindset. That's just crazy. So I can't really say that without being self-critical of my current situation, talking to you, when in fact it's something that has to happen from your own perspectives, from your own agency, and from your own together. It can't be brought from the outside, is what I'm trying to say. But on the other hand, I want to support that movement, and I want to decolonize myself, actually, as a Alistair Pentecook's book, English and the Discourses of Colonialism, was very important for me, 1998, showing how Western TESOL or British ELT has roots going back to colonial times, and the idea that there should be one method, or that you should only teach in English, etc., that these have colonial roots. So my own approach has been to try to understand that in my own profession, in my own views, and try to stand on the side of those who want to counter, who want to move against that, and to support, basically, those who want to develop a more equal relationship, or a more locally appropriate kind of TESOL. As it's going on, it's a trend. It's definitely a trend. It's been happening since the 90s. We can already see in my article about the history of the ELT journal, I show in the ELT journal last year, in January, I show how it's gone through stages of being very much saying Britain knows best for the first 25 years. The second 25 years, more communicative language teaching is a good thing, but still very much Britain knows best. And then the last 25 years have seen a questioning, or a decentering, as I call it. And that is definitely a trend, and a very important trend, overall trend, which I want to stand on that side, basically. So that's why I've been involved in the work that I have been involved in, and I hope it was clear that I'm not advocating a new method or anything. I think the approaches that I've been involved with have been helping teachers to take things into their own hands. So sorry to have a very long reply. I hope that's answered your question to some extent.
Thank you, Professor Richard Smith, once again. And better we build this, success story forum here as well. It has worked a lot with us here in Kathmandu, where we have been working. So this may work with Far Western region friends as well. We all teachers here, and let's even try to conduct the success story conference next year there as well. Let's
Great.
go with that. Yeah, with this, I would like to thank Professor Richard Smith on behalf of Far Western University and entire management committee of this conference. We know that Professor Smith has been with us for a long time, and whenever we have some sort of queries, he always answers us through this presentation, even in last year's Scholars Association presentation or NELTA presentation as well. Thank you so much, Professor. Once again, we are very much thankful to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much again for inviting me, and best wishes for the rest of the conference, and best wishes to all of you. I hope to see you in person one day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Janak sir, over to you now, please.